Have you ever wished that you had more hours in the day? Have you ever said, man, there's just not enough hours in the week to get the things done that I need to get done? And you begin to feel overwhelmed, overwrought completely, and just utterly, totally done with everything going on in your life because you feel like there's just not enough time for you to accomplish the things that you have to do each day, each week, each month, each year. And you get to the end of the year sometimes and you had things that you said, man, I was going to do that. How in 365 days did I not find somewhere to get that done? Well, today, this is the podcast for you because we're going to talk about leverage and how you can use it in your life to get things done better because none of us are getting any more time. So it's up to us to figure out how to leverage the time we do have more wisely. This is the Real Life Godliness Podcast, the podcast that takes the Word of God and puts it down into the grit of your real life where you can actually use it. I'm your host, as always, Pastor Will, and we will be right back. That was a bad pun. Now, I want to do a few house cleaning things here before we even get started on today's podcast. As you know, and as my shirt now says, this podcast is dedicated to, it is built around the idea of being real, of real life, of things that actually happen to us, things that, that are occurring every day, like things that we actually have to deal with. I don't want to bring over spiritualized, over poetic, whatever. I don't know what the right word here would be, but I don't want to act like there's some higher plane beyond this world we're living in right now, other than a life lived fully committed to God, right? So we talked about in the beginning how that our lives should not be compartmentalized. The very first episode, the very first thing we talked about is real life, how that your spiritual life and your carnal, physical life, however you want to put that, are not separated. And that the separation that we've done is what has caused us all the problems. And the whole purpose of this podcast is from 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, where it says that God has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness. And the word life there is the Greek word zoe, which simply means biological life. It means real life. It's what we deal with on the daily. It's our walking around on the ground life. It's digging in the dirt, doing the work, getting calluses on your hands, having a hurt back and bad shoulders, as I now seem to have come to the point in my life that my shoulders decided, hey, you're 37. I'm just going to hurt now for the rest of eternity. No real reason why. I can't figure that out. But anyways, it's real life. Things are happening to us. There are arguments that are happening. There are problems at work that just shouldn't be there. There are things going on at church maybe that shouldn't be there, or at least we feel that way. And there's just things going on. All right, it's real life. And that's what this podcast is dedicated to. So the reason I'm saying all that is to say that this podcast will not always be, how I put it, family friendly in the sense of me skirting around any subject I might talk about. Okay. If we're going to talk about sex, we'll talk about sex. Like, just because that is real life. It's part of our life. It was created by God. It's in the Bible more places than you might think. And God is not squeamish about it. I remember hearing a message from John MacArthur one time, and he said, God is not as squeamish about, sex and physicality and all the different things that have to go along with that as we are, as we might think, and as the Christian church has kind of made it to be in many cases. And the reality is those things should not be as strange for us to discuss maybe as we think. It is all over the Bible. In just that one respect of that one thing. And much of the Bible can't be understood without knowing what those things are. And there's other things like circumcision. That's a huge part of the Bible, and people don't ever talk about it because it's a mixed company, and I kind of get what it is. And there are things that I will say on here that I probably would not say from the pulpit, obviously, and that's what this is for. And so I'm just forewarning you. I'm not saying that I'm not going to talk about any of that today, I don't think, in any of what I have, but I want to put that out there so that when that subject just pops up somewhere and I just go off in this tangent and I'm talking about it, that people aren't, freaking out and losing their minds. It's going to happen. And if you don't like that, then maybe this is not the podcast for you, because this is the For Real Life and Godliness Podcast, the podcast that takes the Word of God and puts it down into the grit of your real life, right? And so all those things are part of it. And that's not, like I said, that's not the only thing, but that's just the biggest thing, right? And that's going to be part of some of these things that I say and talk about in the future, simply because it is part of our real lives. And I just want to put that out there for you. A lot of people look at me simply in the vein of like student ministry and stuff, but I would talk about this to the older students no matter what. If I was going to have a conversation about this, I would have a full-on real conversation openly, because I believe that that's what students need today anyways. But this is not a student-led podcast. It's not aimed at that level. It's aimed at anybody who's living out there in the real world. Really, it's probably aimed more at people who are married and have families and have kids than anything else, because that's who I am. So that's what my experience is going to be. I've had kids for a long time. My oldest daughter is going to turn 10 this month. And so I have had children for a decade at this point. And that is where the majority of my perspective is going to come from. And so if you don't have kids, you've been married for a long time, then maybe you might not get a lot of things I'm going to say, because you just can't know what that is without experiencing it for yourself. But I'm just kind of throwing that out there because this is the 6th episode. Most people only get to 5 or 4 or 5 or so. And so I'm getting over the hump. And in fact, I was sitting here this morning trying to figure out what in the world am I going to talk about today. And it happens. I literally set all the camera stuff up, the lights and everything else. And then I sat down. Okay, what are we going to talk about? And I looked through, and there's several things I had in my mind, and they're just all over the place. And I went back to something I had written about a year and a half ago. If you don't know, I had started something similar to this in written form on Twitter about a year ago, and I had built a page on there to 700-800 people, and I would help people, and I was looking into doing like one-on-one coaching and stuff like that. I was looking to do a lot of stuff. I was trying to start doing something because I felt like the experiences I had and the skills I've learned over the past 20 years of my life, and all the stuff that I've gone through, all the things that leading a life of risk has brought into my life, as I talked about on the last podcast, taking the risks, jumping off into things I didn't know how they would turn out. And there's a whole podcast I'm going to do on where that was a very crucial in my life, and a huge pivotal point where that attitude really sunk in, and I took the big first leap into that direction and that philosophy. That'll be a different time. But that lifestyle, that philosophy of just doing things, right? And really, I kind of, fancied it up by saying, be a pioneer and have risks, take risks, and all sorts of stuff. But really what it is, if you want to boil it down to a simple idea, is I like to just do things and see what happens. And I don't know if I would always recommend that for people. But as I said in the last podcast, being an extremely cautious kid when I grew up, as I was growing up, it was kind of like the absolute I have to do this. Like I have to go to an extreme. I have to break out of what I'm doing and how I live and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so that was the attitude I developed. Instead of thinking through everything, overthinking like I like to do, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And that lifestyle has brought a lot of lessons in my life. And so I've been trying for a year and a half, 2 years, really for a long time, to figure out a way that I could convey these lessons to someone else. Twitter was the first place, and I began to write on there and kind of copyright, if you know anything about that world. And it just didn't work out. It took too much time. I ended up using time I shouldn't be using for it because it took a lot of thought, and then to write out stuff, and then to use Twitter's format, or X's format at this point. and to get things in there right just didn't, it took too much time to do all that. And so I ended up quitting after 3 to 4 months after I built the page up and I had a following and had all this stuff. I had a lot of success going on. It just was taking too much time. It was taken away from my family a little bit, but it was more taken away from what I need to do in my job and my position at the church. And so it was interfering with that. I was spending time I shouldn't be spending and stuff like that. And so it was wrong. And so I kind of cut it off but I still had that desire to convey, which is where we are today. Saying all that, I went back into the archives of my X profile and looked at some lessons and things and threads that I had created there, things that were successful, things that people really enjoyed and got, value out of. And one of them was written on the idea of leverage, And it actually came, as I said, everything's always real life, right? It actually came from an experience I had here at the church trying to move in a new dishwasher in the kitchen downstairs. And it was a huge, heavy piece of equipment. And from that experience where we were trying to figure out how to get it off the truck into the place it needed to be and installed and all that kind of stuff, right? Why we were doing it, I don't really know, but that just is how it worked out. So we had to figure it out, right? And one thing I've definitely learned over the course of my life is how to be a problem solver. And so we went around and tried to figure out how to get this huge dishwasher in. Our dishwasher had gone out, and this another one shows up. It's on a crate. It's on a pallet. It's too heavy, really, to lift. And this lesson came from that. So I'm going to start off. I'm probably going to read from this as I'm going through this. That way I can kind of keep my train of thought, not rabbit trail like I just did for the last 10 minutes about, all that stuff. So leverage. And the key here is that we are never going to find more time, right? We all complain about not having enough time, and yet we all have the same time. Everybody gets the same 24 hours in a day. It's never more, it's never less. I mean, probably technically is. There's probably like some shortening or lengthening of days or something that I don't know about. But regardless, that's going to be minuscule compared to the tasks that you need to get done. And so we all get the same 24 hours, the same 7 days, the same 365 days or whatever it is, unless I guess you're, Jewish or Israeli, then you have 360 days. Or however they work that thing. But you never get more time. Whatever construct that you are currently in, you're never going to get more of it. And so the only thing you can actually do is to find ways to add more value to the time that you have, to accomplish more, to do more. And in order to do that, you need to leverage the time you have. Because if you don't get more of it, then you need to make the most of it. And for an example, we can look at Luke chapter 10, verse 1. Because Jesus, being a man on earth, was confined to all the things we are confined to. One thing that we miss a lot when we talk about the life of Christ is how human he really was. He did not live and act like the Son of God when he was on earth. He suffered all the things we suffered, Hebrews tells us, and went through all the pressures that we have every day of our life, yet without sin. And so he did also deal with the difficulties of living within a span of time and needing to get things done on time, within a span of time. So he took advantage of the assets he had and utilized them, leveraged them to make his time more valuable, to have things multiply his impact. And he used people, in his case, to do that. Luke chapter 10, verse 1 says, "After these things, the Lord appointed other 70 also, and sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place, whither he himself would come." And so instead of having to go there himself and set up what he's trying to do and to prime the crowd and do everything he's doing, which would take more time, he sends 70 other people before him so they can prepare the way. They can take care of the preliminaries. They can introduce the gospel. They can preach the gospel to them. At another time, he had sent the 12 out in the same exact way to preach in places that he did not actually go. They were sent out to preach the gospel of the kingdom on their own, 2 by 2 in partnership. And so Jesus is leveraging the assets, the people that are around him, to expand his influence, to multiply the impact that he can possibly have in the span of time he was given here on earth. His ministry was literally 3.5 years. That's a short window of time to have any kind of ministry at all. So he has to make the most of the time that he is given. And he does that. He multiplies his impact by delegating to people around him. And so that's going to kind of feed into, that's a biblical example of someone utilizing things or people around them to maximize their time. Verse 2 says, the harvest truly is great. And so the need was there, and he could not physically be everywhere at the same time doing the same thing for everybody. And so he uses those who are his followers. He says that the harvest is great. It's huge. He says the laborers are few. Pray or ask, therefore, the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into his harvest. And then he gives them instructions on what to do. And he instructs them. He says, go out and do this, and then come back and tell me what happens, and yada, yada. But he's utilizing what he has to multiply the task at hand to accomplish his goals. And so that's from the Bible. And here, I want to go through an example I had here with this dishwasher. And so when we received this dishwasher, right, we needed to move it around, and it was unwieldy. It was a weird shape. There's no way to really grab it and get under it or anything else. And our task was obviously moving it into place without damaging it or ourselves, right? And we're not getting any younger. And so we don't, like I just said, I have enough pains just with my body, deciding to hurt the next day after I wake up for no reason at all. And so I don't need to add to that. If we were to attempt to move it on our own strength, we would have a lot of bad stuff that might occur, right? We could have damage to the gym floor, trying to scoot the pallet across it. That probably would have damaged the gym floor a lot. Possible damage to the unit if we dropped it, or if something happened to it like that, right? And so possible hernia for ourselves. And when I wrote this out, I had, amounts of money that would cost to fix each thing beside it. And so if we had a hernia, it had like a bunch of money points right beside it. And it would cost a lot of money. And, no matter what we did, if the negative happened, we would end up costing more time and more money. And, then we would be losing advantage. And so enters one of the simplest, probably oldest means of moving something extremely heavy in existence, and that is the lever, right? The hand truck, which is essentially just a lever, right? It has a pivot point, it has a longer side and a shorter side, and it increases your ability to do work, right? After strapping that unit to the hand truck, it required only 2 people. And I think it was me and Andrew did it, because I wrote down me and the sound guy. So I guess that was Andrew. So me and Andrew could move it by ourselves without having 3, 4, or 5 other people trying to get around it, which if we tried to move it any other way would have been required. But when we did that, we spent less time, less energy, and less money on pain meds, I said. And notice, though, that our abilities did not increase. We didn't go out and get more strength or more power or anything like that. We took exactly what we had in the beginning, same amount of strength, same people, same whatever, and we used a simple machine to leverage our existing strength and multiply our outcomes and minimize the waste. That's what the lever does. It leverages your existing strength by multiplying force, which multiplies your outcome, and then it minimizes waste or damage or anything else, really. And this is the same thing that you're going to have to do with your time. When you leverage time, what you're doing is adding value to the minutes, to the hours that you have. And value equals skills or systems. That's what you're going to add to it. That's how it's going to work, right? And so whether it's using a notepad and a list to keep track throughout the day, an app that's on your phone that schedules and says, hey, you spent way too much time on your phone. Hey, you need to do this by this point in time. Hey, you need to wake up at this point in time, or whatever it might be. Maybe it's a business that you hire for your business that solves a bottleneck. Your business may have a bottleneck. It's like, hey, every time we replace these filters in our business or in our shop, there's this guy who has to show up, there's this other guy who has to show up, and then this other guy has to show up. And if you could find a company that did the job of those three people, then you are solving a bottleneck, a place where there's too much waste and too much time and too much energy coming in and too much of your money going out. If you could find a company that would do all three things at one time, instead of having someone take down the filter, someone clean out the air duct, and someone to, reset the sensor. I don't know anything about HVAC or HEPA filters or anything, but it's something like that. If you could have somebody come in and do all three, then you are leveraging your money and your time better for your business. And so maybe you need to delegate to somebody else who has more skill than you do, right? Or maybe you need to add skills to yourself so that your own time is used better. All these options are just glorified hand trucks in a philosophical sense, I guess. Learning to leverage your time is not about finding more of it. It's multiplying the outcomes of the time you already have. Jim Rohn would say that don't waste major time on minor things. And many times the reason we don't have time left to do the major things we know need to happen is because we've wasted a lot of time on things that we thought were urgent, right? The urgent always sucks up all the air of the important. And we're running here and we're doing that and we're putting out fires, and we never really stop and ask ourselves, do I really need to be doing that? Is that something that I need to do? Especially if you're running a business and you're the owner. If you find yourself doing like multiple tasks that obviously should be done by somebody else, then there's a question you need to ask. Am I taking too much control and not allowing my delegated authority to actually happen? Like, I'm not allowing them to fail. I'm not allowing them to try and maybe not come out with the outcome that I would normally want. Because you have to be willing to let people fail so that they can learn. And it's hard to do that when you let go of things. But that's what leveraging is. It's not always going to work out the first time, but you need to allow someone else to come in there and do the job you gave them to do if you expect to have better use of your own time. And so leveraging also is on that end of things. And so you don't want to waste your time on things that don't matter. Don't waste your time arguing on Facebook or something, or waste your time scrolling through your phone. Like, that's a waste of time. And at the end of the day, you start to say, man, I don't have any time left to do such. And then you don't think back in your life and think, man, where could I have used my time more wisely? Where could I have leveraged it in a better way, or my efforts or whatever it might be? And then I can interject kind of a personal story here that, when I was in Florida, and really it was the kickoff to where I'm at today, I had complained a lot to God about not having enough time. Because being bivocational, you are not only dealing with, family and ministry, but also a job. And so you don't have a whole lot of time, right? That's like the thing that you lose the most when you are in bivocational ministry. You just don't have a lot of time, or at least you don't think you do. And so I would complain that I didn't have enough time to do my messages and my lessons right and all this other stuff. And then, God began to put his finger on certain points of my life where I was wasting time and not leveraging it like I should. And one of those was I played video games way too much, okay? And I still play them today. And there are certain points even today where I'm like, man, I spent too much time doing that. And I'll have to cut back, or I'll I'll take the cord off of the PlayStation and I'll just stick it somewhere so that it makes it more difficult to just go down and turn it on. I have to go down and find the cord where I put it, plug it back in, and do all this other stuff. So I put resistance between me and the thing that wants to waste my time. And so that it's actually easier for me to go do something productive than it is for me to, waste my time. And that's just a whole nother side note. But when I was younger, in my 20s in Florida still, I'd play that like a lot. I mean, 2 or 3 hours, a night, and almost like every 4 or 5 nights, which I know for some of you guys, it sounds like rookie numbers, but you shouldn't be playing for 5 or 6 hours either, or 10 or whatever it is that you play. It's a waste of time. Anyways, so God said, look, you say that you don't have enough time to study right, and yet you spend 2, 3, 4 hours a night on your PlayStation. And I was like, man. And from that point, when I was convicted about that and I put that away, I actually stopped playing video games from then for like years. Like I just didn't play them anymore. I literally just stopped because I couldn't justify from that point, since I complained to God so much and he convicted me about it, I couldn't justify going back and wasting that time anymore. And so that just got cut out of my life. And then another thing he put on me was that, look, you are a supervisor now. You're a project manager. As I went on farther, you drive around most of the time, right? I was that guy. I was the guy in the truck now. The guy I used to hate when I was a garbage carrier. I used to hate the kind of guy that I was like, oh, he's just driving around. He's lazy. He's this, that, and other thing. And that's kind of who I became. And so God's like, you spend all this time by yourself driving around in your truck, checking on jobs from job site to job site to job site, making sure stuff gets done. All that time driving, couldn't you listen to sermons or lessons or whatever? And I was like, man, yeah, I could. And so I ended up finding tons of time that I just had not been leveraging and wasting all that time. And it was due to those 2 changes in my life that actually led me here to where I am today. It is where I began to feel the pressure, and we'll talk about this in our podcast about how God kind of moves us in his will. But I began to felt that pressure of the move of God in my life, where you begin to become uncomfortable and you begin to think, man, there's something more than this. I need to go beyond here, and begin to listen to these messages, and this theme was over and over and over again. I heard it everywhere I went, about the older pastors who are moving off the scene and who's going to replace them and who's going to come in behind them to hold up the truth. And that theme, even still today, is continually pressuring in my mind and my thoughts and what I do. And that is the driving force that made me take the risk of moving from where I was in a comfortable place with a good job and a ministry that sometimes I even, I think, man, was it really the right thing? Because once I left where I was at, nobody came in and stepped in my place, and it just didn't end up well. And then it makes me, just sad, I guess, probably more than anything. But it was necessary for us. It was the right move. But what made me willing to do that was this idea of, who's going to come in behind these older pastors who are passing off the scene. And that came from me leveraging my time and listening to sermons. And I listened to hours and hours and hours. I mean, I've probably listened to thousands of hours of sermons now because of that period of time. I mean, I would spend probably 6 hours of my day doing that. When I wasn't doing anything else, that's what I was doing. I was riding around listening to that. Even when I was working, if I had to do something myself, same thing. And so point here is that you're never going to have more time, but you need to leverage the time you have. You need to find a way to make the time you have work better. Just like we needed to find a way to make our strength multiplied to move that dishwasher, which seems such a simple thing, but we needed to find a way to multiply our efforts so that in order to get that in there and put it in right without damaging it or ourselves. And we don't want to waste time trying to just manage it ourselves. We found a way around that. And we added the hand truck and added more value to our efforts. And as I said in my post, you'll never have more or less of a day. So you need to get to sleep. You wake up early with a plan on how you will accomplish your day by the most effective means. And whether that means pen and paper, an app, or some business that comes into your life or business, you can hire coaches, you can hire people like that, which actually help you do better with your time. They're all levers numbers. They're all ways to multiply what you're trying to do in your life. And you will find more success in your life when you begin to stop wasting the limited time you have and begin to maximize the time in the best way possible. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I've done this perfectly all my life. There are plenty of things, and I'm always conscious of it, that I wasted time here. I should have used that more wisely. I should have read more. I should learn more. I should improve more. And so that's always a constant idea in my mind all the time since that point, because it had such a dramatic effect on my life. When I began to actually use my time, it made the biggest impact in my life that I've had in a long, period of time. Besides me moving to Florida to go to college in the first place, that was the biggest move. I mean, in the time I was in Florida, I became a student pastor. I became ordained. I became an associate pastor. I got married. I had two kids. And all this stuff happened. And I went from being the trash carrier guy at the bottom rung, painting the soffits, as you saw there in, I think 2 episodes ago, and all that kind of stuff. And through all these principles that I began to put in my life from the Word of God, I took the principles of the Word of God, put in my real life. I moved up to becoming a project manager, who I was the guy driving around the truck and telling everybody what else to do and making sure they got things done and listening to their problems and figuring out solutions to the things that were going on in their job sites and all that jazz. All that happened while I was in Florida. And so the big move to go down there, I was single, but it was a much bigger move for me to take my wife and my kids and uproot us from a place that we had been for 10 years or so and just jump into something completely new in the place that I live now. And it all started from a simple tweak to my life where God said, you're not utilizing, you're not leveraging, you're not maximizing the time you have. You're wasting it on entertainment, or you're just driving around wasting it doing nothing or listening, talk radio or whatever it was I was doing at the time back then. And those two things, cutting out my wasted time in the evenings and my wasted time in the day and whatever openings I had where I could throw more messages, more Bible study, which obviously in my case, if maybe you're a business owner, you need to throw in more classes or listening to somebody who is in the field you're in and they're successful, someone you look up to. Maybe you're an athlete and you have certain people you look up to. Will find more times to watch what they do, and so you can learn their secrets and find more times to practice. Don't waste time. The difference between someone who's successful in sport and someone who's not is someone who puts in the training in the darkness. As we talked about a few weeks ago, you have to train in the darkness when no one else will do it, when no one else sees, when no one else is at the batting cages, no one else is on the court, no one else is kicking the field goal or throwing the football or running the plays, and no one else is studying the tapes. When no one else is doing that, when other people are entertaining themselves, if you can be the one who's adding to yourself, then you are going to be the one who's leveraging your time later, and you're going to be the one who's successful in whatever field, whether you're in ministry, whether you're in business, whether you're in sports, whether you're in any kind of vocation. The one who leverages his time the best is the one who will succeed the most. And that's always going to be the way it is. If I lost you back there, you probably aren't listening to this, but I'm sorry. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Sometimes I can ramble, which is one of the things I'm trying to work on with this podcast. This episode is not good evidence of that, but this has been the For Real Life and Godliness Podcast. And I am, as always, your host, Pastor Will. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe. If you are on Spotify listening to this on Apple Podcasts, add me to your playlist. Rate my show 5 stars. If you don't want to put 5 stars, don't put anything, please. Just, walk on. Or just tell me what you don't like and I will fix it rather than, bash me over there. But yeah, leave me a rating, drop me a follow, give me a like, whatever you want to do, wherever you find me. just know that I'm on your side. I want you to win. I want your real life to not have any barricades or any compartments in it, but that your real life is your spiritual walk lived out in physical form as you glorify God and do things according to His will. Like that's the goal of this podcast. And I will see you on the next one.